Today we're going to start with some housekeeping. Got a few things to take care of right off the bat. You can probably tell right now from if you just look at the command prompt, that we're on an old version of Angular. So there's some really cool things in Angular 14 that would be nice to take advantage of. It'd be nice to be on the latest version of NX. So um, as a point of housekeeping, let's take care of that right away. To do that, we're just going to do nx migrate latest. While we're doing this, let's take a look and just make sure the version of Node that we're on is still a good version. So we'll go to GitHub. While that's running in the background, we can take a look, and I will pop this into chat just so that we have it. This is the table. I love it. It's maintained by Lars Jarup Brink Nielsen, also Lazy DK. A great table. And if we're looking, Angular 14 is compatible with Node 14 or 16, and the Angular CLI between 4.6 and 4.8, and RxJS over 7.4. We have met all of these, I think, already. So we'll check again. With Volta, we'll just make sure that all of our things match. So we're on node 1615. We're on npm 8. Oh, are we using yarn for this one? tsconfig package. No, this one we were using npm. It might be another project where we're using yarn. But yeah, so our node version matches up. And just so you know, the way that I can determine what package manager we're using, npm uses package lock, yarn uses yarn lock, pnpm uses something else, but I don't use pnpm. That's something I need to pick up and learn. But definitely you can check really quick by just looking at the lock file based on your package.json, and that's how you can tell your package manager. Our Angular CLI and NX CLI will be upgraded based on the updates that we made with this upgrade. We can see that we're upgrading Narwhal Storybook, we're upgrading Angular Core. So we're upgrading Angular, it looks like, to 14. That's interesting. I would have expected more things to upgrade. But if we read, it says to check out our package.json, make sure that that makes sense. Then we need to run an npm install, and then we need to run this npx migrate run nx migrate run migrations, because there have been some migrations created. So we can take a look at both of those. If we look here, so we look in the package.json. Oh yeah, it did upgrade quite a bit more. So our animations, basically all of our Angular, it looks like, has been upgraded. Yeah, all of our Angular is being upgraded to the latest versions. Our CLI is staying the same. That's interesting. Upgrading all of the Narwhal plugins. They're upgrading Storybook, upgrading ESLint, and TypeScript. We'll go ahead and run the npm install. And get all of those packages upgraded to the versions that are in there. And while that's running in the background, we can look at the migrations. And just make sure that the migrations make sense. So it says we're going to add a JSON schema. Looks like most of the stuff has to do with NX. Replacing relative paths with absolute paths. target dependencies, source analysis for all workspaces. Browser and servers. Interesting. Update the Angular CLI package version. Oh, so that it may do it in the middle of the. Interesting. Remove package.json files from library projects. Update the post install script. Oh, we're gonna target ES 2020. That'll be nice. Get some new features with our TypeScript that we won't have to polyfill. Initial navigation. Entry components are no longer necessary. That's nice. Really nice thing. Yeah, so Angular 14 forms model classes in a type. Path match property of routes was updated to be a strict union of the two valid options, full and prefix. That looks good. Ooh. Package lock was created with an old version of npm. Okay. So this error looks scary, but it's just saying that it can't resolve some dependencies. And it gives you, we can run it with force or legacy-peer-deps. That's what we're going to do, is we're going to run it with the legacy peer-deps, and that will just change the way that it resolves. It resolves peer dependencies so that it's not as strict, and a failing peer dependency won't break the install. Once that's done, we'll stop running with the legacy peer dependencies, but sometimes in these big upgrades, it's a necessary thing to do. Well, the first thing that would be nice is to have an actual application and not just some components sitting in Storybook. Storybook has been awesome, and we'll keep using Storybook to develop new components to get the look and feel nailed down. At some point I may just upgrade this to use Yarn, or even experiment with pnpm. I've seen some amazing demos, and pnpm can take an existing npm and upgrade it. We're going to run the migrations now. Because that's the second step. So our migrations all finished successfully. And all of our stuff changed. I'm just going to stage all of this. I like to just look at what actually changed. And so I typically will stage one by one. This is an exciting change for me, going from 2017 to 2020. And again, looks like not much. Oh, missed that one. Just change the schema. So this is an interesting one, and I've had a couple discussions with people. I think I'm going to start committing the migrations.json just so that we can have a history of what migrations were actually run. Even if that file sticks around, NX won't notify you of a migrations.json existing unless it creates one itself. It's changing cacheable stuff. Package lock, that's going to take a while. The package we already looked at and the tsconfig.base are unchanged. So upgrade NX and Angular. We'll commit this, we'll push it. And that reminds me, I need to grab from GitHub. I want to make sure that you guys have a link to the actual repository. So if you want to do anything there. Now that we've got that all done, I want to run Storybook and just make sure that everything in Storybook looks okay. If we look at this, it looks like our error cell looks great. Our primary cell is doing okay. Our grid has the checkerboard pattern that we added, and it looks like we've got the column and the cell, or the column and the row highlighting going on still. One thing that we don't have yet is the grid highlighting, and these colors are ugly. But I've spent a bunch of time in CSS working on this. I really want to get down into the Angular itself. The main reason I'm serving this up and checking it out is just to make sure that our upgrade went well, and it did. So let's get into some actual code. So currently, if we go into our apps, and we've got an NX welcome component that we no longer need. Oh, look at that. So we've got this NX welcome component, and if we do an ng-serve, we haven't even touched the application. We've only worked in the libs, specifically with the components that will be part of this. I really like this new landing page. The other thing that I like, and we can look at it in the code, but I really like that NX gives you all of this nice stuff. So if you set up an NX workspace, they tell you, hey, this is what you can do. This is how you can move forward. I really like that about NX. But for right now, let's stop this. One of the really nice things that they did was they moved this all into one component. Because in the past, it was all in your app component.html. And so to clean it up, you had to go in and you had to clean up your app component. It's become a lot easier now. We can just delete this file. And we can see that it's being used in the spec. And it's being used in the module. So we'll tell it we just want it to remove those. So the nice thing, oh, it should have removed that. Oh well. We can pull that out. Should have just deleted it here, and then the import cleanup would have cleaned that up. I don't even think we need the bootstrap component anymore, do we? Let's try commenting that out. I believe that's one of the changes in Angular 14 that we no longer need bootstrap component. No, nope, I'm wrong. We don't need entry components since Angular 13. We do need bootstrap. It needs to know which application to start, or which component to start. So that was definitely a wrong call on my part. The app component is pretty anemic right now. When we start adding routes to the Sudoku, we'll move this title into the router. We don't need this anymore. So we'll pull this out. And when we get into tests, I prefer to write the tests in Spectator. So we'll do Spectator. I also want to get into Cypress for the actual test interactions. Let's see. How do we want to go about doing this? First thing I'd like to do is just have a Sudoku grid here. That's going to be kind of our base. This is one of the amazing things about WebStorm, is that you can just do a control dot and tell it to import from that grid. It will go out and find that. It will add it to your app module. So it's added the grid component here, and it's imported it from. That's an interesting import. Is that really what my Angular JSON says? Angular Sudoku. No, that's not the one I want. I want the tsconfig.base.json. Interesting. Okay, I guess I set that up. I like that path. I was just surprised that it was there. So I killed the ng-serve. Let's serve it up again. As we get more libraries in here, and I don't know that we're going to get too many because we're doing our own styling. We aren't importing a style library. But I would like to investigate some stuff that I've learned about bundling, specifically around how we can make our main bundles smaller. So that's another thing I'd like to look into. We should have a grid on the page. We do. So we've got our grid on the page. It doesn't look too great yet, but the big thing I want to do is right now, the only things that are valid in this entire Sudoku are the rows and the columns. And that's not good. Or not the only thing that's valid are the rows, right? They're the only thing that's not violating rules. Right now, we're violating rules in columns. We're violating rules within the grid. So it would be nice if we could detect that and add the error status to our cells. So that's the first thing I want to do. Let's start by creating basically a grid analyzer. And this grid analyzer will run anytime the grid is changed. And the grid analyzer can be swapped out at runtime. Probably the best way to do this is to create a library. And the library will have different grid analyzers in there. And if we come up with new ideas for grid analyzers down the road, having a grid analyzer library that gives us information will be very useful. So let's start there. So let's go into WebStorm. Let's pick NX and let's ask it to generate a library for us. And in this library, we're going to name this library Grid Analyzers. The directory, we don't really care. It doesn't need to be publishable. Doesn't need to be buildable. We won't have generated selectors, but in case we do, we'll add that. No, we don't want to skip formatting. Keep the module name simple when using -- directory. I don't think I care about that too much. A module spec, I can add that later if I need it. I do want dependencies in package JSON. Skipping the post install script. No, that's fine. Our tsconfig. We won't need routing. We won't need to lazy load. Well, we might lazy load this, but we'll do it in a different way. We aren't going to be routing to this module, so we'll have to do lazy loading in a different way. We won't have a parent module. Our unit test runner, are we using Jest for this? If I go and look, so our spec.tia, we are using Jest. So we will leave Jest as our test runner. The import path, we'll do Sudoku / grid analyzers. Stricter type checking. Oh, you know, I just realized that I saw a tweet today that WebStorm will support standalone um, components in the near future. So when it supports standalone components, we'll convert our components over to standalone components. Um, Split the project configuration into project JSON. I don't think so. That doesn't matter. Set partial. That's for ESLint. We aren't using Tailwind, and um, I'm not going to skip this yet. Um, so we'll come up and do our dry run and make sure that everything looks like it's going in the right place. It's going to add it to libs, grid analyzers. That looks good. You do think you'd use a standalone config. I'll go ahead and do it. Why would you use a standalone config? Because I would love to learn. So we'll use a standalone config for this one. Okay, fair enough. That's a fair call. I'll give it a shot and see what that does. So it looks like we're getting our TS configs. We're getting our module. We're updating the base because we're going to need that. Oh, and so it moves the project.json into the lib. Interesting. That means that we can configure this library from inside of the library instead of having to go find the project.json to configure it there. I like that. Good call. Thank you. I appreciate that. And now we're done. I love the NX tools that they add to VS Code. The VS Code version of the NX tools is a lot more in depth, and I actually tend to prefer it. But they've definitely improved the tools for WebStorm, and they're a lot better. Let's go into our grid analyzers, and let's see. This is our components lib, and no, I don't want to move that. So here within our grid analyzers, and you know what? I'm not really committing that often. I should be committing more often. So let's commit these. And I could just stage all of this. I don't really need to look through it. So we've added the grid analyzers library. So at this point, the grid analyzers library really doesn't do anything for us. Within the library, I would like to add an interface. And we'll just call it a grid analyzer. We'll just go with just grid analyzer. I don't think adding interface.ts really benefits anything. So we'll just add the grid analyzer.ts, and this is going to be this is just going to be our interface. And right now, analyze is It's going to have a function. Really, I think when I look at the grid, and we probably have to get into the components itself, because one of the things that I've done in the grid right now, the input grid is just an array of numbers. Um, and that doesn't really help us too much. It is good that it's a two-dimensional grid because it mirrors what's going on, and we're using the X and the Y location to get the value of the grid at that location. But the problem with the grid as it is that say we analyze this grid and we determine all of these columns are errors, right? To add errors to each of those cells, we would have to either return the X and Y values and then loop through all of those, or there are a bunch of things that we would have to do that are suboptimal. We don't want this grid to be a group of cells because the grid analyzer could potentially be a dependency of the grid. And then if we use cells in the grid analyzer, then we wind up with a circular dependency between cells and, between the components and the grid analyzers. And that's not a good thing. What we probably want to do is create another library that will be the go-between between the grid component and our grid analyzers. I guess we could have another library and call it game or game state. Yeah, it's kind of the domain library. Grid analyzers would depend on it, and so would the app. The other things that could go into this library are potentially the state of the game itself, things like that, so that everything, it would mostly be interfaces like you said, and maybe the domain name is a good name. If we call this new library domain, and I agree, we should be separating game state from everything else. I think domain is a good name for the library. Domain is very DDD specific, right? And we're not really doing DDD. You don't think domain is DDD specific, Brunivu? You know what? We're spending way too much time on the name. I liked the name domain. I think everybody else agrees that it's good to separate the state and everything out. So we'll do it. Interfaces or models. Yeah. Sometimes I'll add an interface. Well, not necessarily interfaces, but like a models folder where I'll stick all of the models and stuff in that. Domain it is. The people have spoken. Let's go with domain. So again, we'll go into NX. We're going to generate a new library. We're going to call it domain. Domain. And we can leave Sudoku there. And I don't think we need to change very much else, right? We just need to change here to be domain. And that's it. I always do a dry run just to make sure that I haven't messed anything else up. Yes, you're absolutely right. If we were in the MVVM model, we are describing our model layer. It's definitely the point of this is to decouple the game state and any other game specific models from any of the other classes. So yes, if we were going MVVM or even MVC or anything like that, we're talking about kind of the model layer. It looks like it's setting everything up in libs domain. Great. So let's go ahead and generate this. So now we've got our domain object. So let's go back here and let's stage all of this. And we added the domain library. The thing I do like about domain as a name is that it communicates very clearly what should be inside of here. Like components communicates very clearly what should be inside of that library. I don't know when the last time I've used MVVM or even the MVC pattern. I guess Angular is kind of an MVC pattern, but maybe a more modernized version of it or an MVVM pattern. I haven't specifically used that pattern. Decoupling always makes your application less brittle. For example, right now we're in a bad place because we just use numbers to